What makes for an interesting villain? The compellingness of a villain can easily make or break any story, and one of the reasons people flock to series like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Berserk is because of the villains, as well as their impacts on the heroes and the story. When it comes to Tomura Shigaraki from My Hero Academia, what comes to mind? A man-child who sees his allies as mere tools, someone quick to anger and incapable of rational thinking when it's required, and someone who isn't capable of seeing the larger picture. You may have noticed what I said doesn't align with the scenes I just showed. They absolutely apply for Shigaraki when he first appears in the USJ arc, but can you say the same about him in the Overhaul arc?
Start over as many times as it takes. I am here to provide you with help. All of this is for you.
Well, Doomers and Doomettes, I'm your host Didi, and today we're going to be starting a My Hero Academia video series called My Villain Academia, where we'll take a look at some of the bad guys in the universe and give them their much-deserved focus as we anticipate content coming in Season 5. If you only watch the anime, don't worry, any points where I'd reference the manga will be given a spoiler warning in advance. However, to keep it simple for the first entry, we will only be using content from the first 4 seasons. This is your official spoiler warning, as we will be reviewing content from Seasons 1 through 4 of My Hero Academia. Today we'll take our first look at one of my favorite villains of all time, Tomura Shigaraki. The interesting thing is, when I first picked up the series during the airing of Season 2, I actually didn't like him at all, and was hoping that All For One would take center stage instead. Even the heroes didn't take him as something legitimate. That completely changed for me with the Hideout arc in Season 3. What was once a character that stomped his feet when he got mad, lashed out, is now thinking rationally, holding back his anger, and showing development. And that moment when All For One reached out to Tomura, it hit me. My Hero Academia is not merely the story of young Midoriya becoming the world's greatest hero. It's a story about successorship, growing into roles expected of you, and the new generation replacing the old. What really makes it unique, however, is these traits are not exclusive to the heroes alone. The villains just as much need to face these similar concepts, and it's absolutely embodied by Shigaraki. This brings me to the core element I'd like to discuss for part 1 of our talk about Tomura Shigaraki. Great villains are a mirror to their hero. Batman is a masked man who hides in the shadows, where Joker will only present himself to an audience to show off his crimes. Griffith represents the concept of destiny, whereas Guts is a man who defies it. Midoriya was an ostracized child, singled out for his lack of quirk, now training to become the next greatest hero under the wing of the former number 1. And Shigaraki, a child left alone in the world, is taken under the care of its greatest monster. The paralleled growth between Midoriya and Shigaraki is visible from the start, and even when they're not directly interacting, they still go through similar periods of growth, and there's even some areas where Shigaraki even excels higher, where Midoriya would be hindered. Let's return all the way to Season 1. If someone were to describe the initial season, they'd probably say it was about Midoriya beginning to train his new abilities and hone his skills. But it's a little bit more than that, isn't it? We're introduced to the symbol of peace, and we're shown that he's not as well as he seems. He needs to maintain the image of a heroic symbol until someone can take up his mantle, his duty. Midoriya isn't only inheriting One for All, but All Might's responsibility and the challenge of becoming the number 1 hero and maintaining that not just for himself and not just for All Might, but for the world. Now let's look at Shigaraki. You might be thinking that All For One didn't pass on any physical powers to Tomura in Season 1, but it's not just about the superpowers, it's about inheriting that responsibility. All For One controlled a supervillain empire, the likes of which could not be challenged by anyone. Not only was he the symbol of evil to stand against All Might, he wielded immense power to the underworld. So while Tomura wasn't gifted a power per se, he was gifted the initial League of Villains as well as the first Nomu. This was Tomura's first assault on Hero Society, and although he had some training wheels on, so to say, it appears as though it was mostly his plan in the field, where he was allowed to make tactical decisions as he saw fit. And what happens? Tomura, of course, fails, really badly I might add, and crawls back to All For One. But All For One doesn't chastise him or tear him down. He didn't lose the responsibility given to him or get demoted like most villain underlings would. Instead, he calmly reassures him that the attack was not in vain and encourages him to keep trying. It really shows how All For One was intending to utilize Shigaraki as far more than just a pawn, and reaffirms him that the goal is to become his own symbol of terror. It was our first real clue that something bigger was in store for him. Season 1 was about both characters being introduced to a new power and struggling to adapt to it. It's both characters' introduction to the new society as they struggle to fit into it, wielding immense responsibility gifted to them. Now let's transition into Season 2. With Midoriya, I'd like to focus on the sports festival. All Might tells our young Midoriya that the goal is to stand out against all the other participants. It's a crucial arc for his journey into the status as the next symbol of peace because, as All Might puts it, it's his way of introducing himself to the world. A necessary point to stand out against the other participants, as it was All Might's own introduction, which, although Deku doesn't win the tournament, he still succeeds in his own way, and the hero world is blown away by him. Following this, we're introduced to Stain. Now, Stain himself has had a tremendous impact on several characters and plot threads, hence his name actually, and is likely deserving of his own video, but let's look at what he is to Shigaraki. After they meet and have their skirmish, Stain makes it clear the difference between him and Shigaraki is the motive behind the killing, something the latter simply doesn't understand. Stain intends to destroy Hero Society to cleanse it, whereas Shigaraki is seemingly aimless at the moment. Begrudgingly, Shigaraki and Kurogiri return Stain to the city, and Tomura issues himself a challenge to see who ends up in tomorrow's paper first. In essence, Tomura's personal challenge was a way for him to stand out to the world against a rival villain, a way to present himself as that aforementioned symbol of terror and to prove his way as the right way. Will sound a little familiar? Similar to Deku, Tomura doesn't win first place. The newspapers and media focus more on Stain. However, it still wasn't a total loss for him either. The confusion around the incorrect League of Villains associations was able to draw some attention to him, which he was able to utilize to his advantage to revamp the league with a new roster. And closing out the season is one of the most important moments in the series.
He's a maniac, but he doesn't destroy things just because it sounds fun.
It's game over for real this time.
Even if the way he acted was wrong, he held true to his beliefs. That's the difference.
That's like a weight off my chest. Yeah, that's it. That's the most rational explanation. I didn't see it even though it was right in front of me the whole time. You know, it's really ironic, Hero Killer. I'm your opposite, but you let me live. And now your ideals and convictions will become a stepping stone for me.
Shigaraki grows. He finds his motive. Comparing the two leading characters in Season 2, it shows us their journey to stand out, a path which doesn't succeed like they intended to, yet they still make their changes to grow into their own identities. Season 3, I think, has the most obvious parallel, so we'll keep this part very brief for now. With All For One and All Might having their big fight, both Shigaraki and Midoriya lost their mentors, and the world lost two huge symbols. This power vacuum in turn creates a larger weight on their shoulders, as both are the only ones who know their places as successors and will struggle to prove themselves as worthy replacements to the world. But one of them may have actually gotten a harder lesson. We'll come back to that. Now, Season 4 gives both characters what I think is the most interesting journey parallel. Hot off the retirement of All Might and the imprisonment of All For One, we're introduced to two important characters, Mirio Togata, also known as Lemillion, and Overhaul. Although a great character who wants nothing more than to help our protagonist, Mirio represents a harsh challenge for Deku to overcome. The problem here is Sir Night-Eye, All Might's former sidekick, actually believes that Mirio is more deserving to inherit the ability of One For All, finding that he embodies the spirit of All Might better than Deku. And he's not exactly wrong. Mirio is an extremely capable fighter, he has a great smile, and he's incredibly optimistic. It's not only about winning over Sir Night-Eye's approval, but it's also about proving that Midoriya is the right candidate for the power and responsibility over someone arguably more like All Might. To them, Overhaul was the antagonist that they had to team up to fight against, which allowed Deku to prove himself, even going so far as to go against the fated future Sir Night-Eye was so certain would come to him with his own ability, Foresight. But with the League of Villains, Overhaul was a different type of antagonist to them and Shigaraki. He wanted to be the new leader of the criminal underworld, and honestly, he had every right to. He arguably had a stronger quirk at the time, an organization with members willing to devote their lives to him and the cause, a detailed plan as well as the resources to carry it out. Tomura, on the other hand, had just lost everything. His master, his caretaker, the resources he had prior, and a member of the League was killed. It was at that point where the League didn't even trust him. Like Deku and Lemillion, arguably the right thing for Tomura to do was to hand over the keys to Overhaul, but he didn't. Instead, Tomura did the one thing he struggled to do for all the past major events. He hatched a plan, proved his capability beyond a reasonable doubt, and succeeded. A plan that didn't just rely on him, but the trust of his comrades as well as his ability to humble himself. The constant failures of the past led up to a moment where the entirety of UA, the heroes, and Overhaul fell right into his trap. Both Midoriya and Shigaraki were presented with candidates that debatedly were more deserving as their role as a successor, and both characters proved themselves beyond a reasonable doubt. But Deku and Shigaraki are not completely identical. We've seen Deku strive and succeed countless times against impossible odds, but Tomura has fallen on his face time and time again. When Midoriya makes a mistake, it may cost him an advantage of the fight, but the hero still will come out as victorious. But Shigaraki doesn't have that type of plot armor that all protagonists have in some form. Well, except for you. You get nothing. As a villain, Shigaraki is expected to lose and to fail. It's his natural role in the story. But if you create a villain who is okay with failure, how can you stop him? If Deku's journey is about proving yourself against impossible odds, Tomura's journey is about constant failure and adapting from it, which, considering he's the villain, is a real terrifying fact. This is a villain who's grown from his faults and uses them as lessons to further himself in forging a new identity. And this takes us back to the events of Season 3, something All For One himself alluded to.
A teacher's job is to help his student become independent. When a student relies on a master and that master disappears, the student's hatred grows, allowing him to walk the path of a true leader.
The key word here is independence, and may be why All For One is arguably the better mentor over All Might. All For One knew when it was time to push the hatchling out of the nest. Through Deku's journey, he's always had the support of All Might, as well as the countless resources available to him from All Might's former colleagues to his UA classmates and faculty. While there were cases where Deku had to win characters over, being the protege of the #1 hero has inevitably granted Deku a certain number of privileges in addition to what he's earned and displayed on his own. And he'll likely always maintain the support of UA and his friends as well as other pro heroes due to his status as a prestigious student. People like the UA faculty have to protect the students by any means necessary out of their duty. It's their job as a hero and a teacher. But Tomura doesn't have that. The world rejected him. He's failed and made tremendous mistakes, and at the worst possible moment, the one man who provided him a sense of belonging was taken away from him. He lost his caretaker, who failed to obtain a greater power for him, and Tomura was alone once more. And with nothing more than the small group of comrades who were about ready to turn their backs on him, Tomura annihilated one of the biggest threats to his rising status. And he didn't just crush the group that tried to overtake him, he stole their life's work and amassed it into his own scheme. The real scary part is, we're not even done here. Deku hasn't come close to being the #1 hero, which means his rising rival hasn't reached that point either. We still have a long way to go. So buckle up, it's gonna be a ride, and I'm certain we'll be returning to talk about Tomura and his friends in the very near future.
Take all this experience, loathing, and regret, and use it as you move forward. Now, it's your turn.
If you've managed to survive my ramblings to the end, I really want to extend my gratitude. I hope you enjoyed listening to these thoughts on one of my favorite anime villains, and at the very least, I hope you got something new out of it. I know the topic of Tomura Shigaraki has been done before. There's a great in-depth video by Oceaniz I highly recommend watching if you haven't already. I tried really hard not to just rip his video off. I'd like to continue this series with another My Hero Academia villain before returning to Shigaraki, but I think Dabi might be saved for a later date. If you have any recommendations or thoughts, let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this content and would like to see more, I would immensely appreciate if you would consider liking the video or even subscribing. That's all for today, and I hope to see you next time.